Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining this Southampton Arts and Humanities Festival event tonight. And it's great to have you with us. I'm just going to share a slide to explain what's going on. As you know, because you've signed up and you're here in the live stream, but also importantly for those who are watching this on demand afterwards, this event is Research Cafe number 41. And as a special festival version of this event, it is in partnership with Tea Talks tonight. More on that in just a moment. As you can see, the event's due to run for just over an hour, and it is audience driven for part of it. So we do hope that you'll be throwing in your own comments and questions to our academics a little bit later on as well. This event is part of the Southampton Arts and Humanities Festival, which has been running for just about a week now and continues through to Saturday. And you can see the link there if you would like to come along to any of the other events. And also on the right is the social media hashtag if you'd like to comment and join in with others in relation to tonight's event. So the only other thing I would say is this is a very informal event. You know, we're doing it online. Research Cafe sometimes is online like tonight, sometimes it's in person, but always it's informal. And we do encourage a kind of a discussion and a chat, and that'll be brought in both through the Tea Talks element in a moment and later on through the discussion about the academics as research and teaching areas. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my colleague, Belinda Milestone, and she is going to run the Tea Talks element of this evening's event. Tea Talk is a lovely series that asks about researchers' lives, careers, favourite kinds of tea, etc. And then later on, we'll come back to the Research Cafe side of it. So Belinda Milestone is in the stream now. Welcome. And Belinda is a teaching fellow in the Academic Centre for International Students in the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Southampton. And without further ado, Belinda, over to you.
Thanks, Tony. So welcome to the Tea Talks part of this evening. And I'd like to welcome my first guest, Adam Procter, Programme Leader for BA Games Design and Art. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. So Adam, what are you drinking tonight?
Okay, so I have a coffee with oat milk, obviously. So that's what's keeping me going. But
okay.
Yeah. But because it's evening, obviously, normally my favourite drink at this point would probably turn to a craft beer, but I've got to be professional and I'm still in the office, so.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing. So my first question to you really is, when did you realise that you could build a career in games?
When did I? Well, I didn't. I never realised I could build a career in games. That's the most interesting thing about even talking to students. That careers don't really exist in the way that people think they do. Stepping stone to this. I just knew that when I was a kid, what I wanted to do was animation, to make cartoons. I didn't even know it was called animation, and that's kind of where I started. So I had no idea you could, build a career in games. I got a Spectrum. I started making games, but I never thought about a career. Who thinks about a career? I just thought about what I wanted to do and what I like doing,
So it's something that you were very passionate about, that you did in your free time. And when was the moment that it became something that you could actually earn a living from?
That's interesting. I mean, I suppose when I finished university, I had a lot of technical skills in terms of using computers and things. Computer animation had just started, and that enabled me to get a sort of job working, like getting people on the internet at the very beginning of the web. So getting people on the web, I know you happen to have a good background in Mac computers as well. So it kind of built from there. And then I was offered a role running some technical provision at another university, again, because of my sort of background in art and technical. So it was kind of like just one step at a time. And that slowly sort of built, slowly then I did some more things, made myself indispensable. That's always a good trick. And then you kind of slowly build up from there,
So something that I found quite surprising about you was that you don't use mainstream social media like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, which is unusual for somebody who's in tech design. So first of all, why don't you use it, and does that inhibit the fact that you can't market yourself very easily?
So I think the first thing to say of all of that is that I was on those services at the very beginning. So 2006, I was on Twitter. I joined Twitter when it was just run by a couple of people. Instagram, same difference. And most services I've always been on first in lots of cases. But social media has changed over the years. And it went from a platform that was about sort of communicating and democratizing communication to a platform that was not about connecting people. It was about selling to people through harvesting the data, and all the social media platforms have gone that way. And I completely believe that is not something that should be automatic. It should be an opt-in, that we should opt in on how our data is used, because I personally feel that we extend ourselves into the machine when we use them and when we put our comments and our lives in there, and that there shouldn't be middlemen harvesting data effectively just to kind of push stuff at you. And I think obviously Facebook over the last few years, we've seen really horrendous things in terms of its data collection. And I remember when it's sort of the scandal, one of the many Facebook scandals, where they released information they'd been basically manipulating the timeline to see what happened if they put more depressing content in front of people or more enjoyable content in front of people, how their moods would change. And surprise, if you put depressing content in front of people, their moods go down. And I remember thinking,
and what was the reason for this? What was the motivation for this?
They want to see how the algorithm affects people, was the main motivation, to see whether they could manipulate people to do certain things. And it was kind of a big test which had no ethical sign off. And so, and I remember thinking at the time, my dad's on Facebook. He doesn't know that the timeline is being manipulated in front of him. And in doing so, that could well be affecting his mental well-being without him even knowing. And I was like, that was again sort of another push. So do I think it affects my ability to market myself? It probably does. But I don't care, because I don't want to market myself through something that's only going to show up to other people if I play the algorithm game, by using the right hashtags, by constantly posting, and then I'm playing into a system where all those systems are designed to keep you online, to keep you addicted to the feeds. And that's not a good thing as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we're seeing it. You look at Instagram and kids, it's already coming out now more and more about how damaging that can be, it's particularly for young girls, so I stay off it because I think I don't think it's good for society, and I don't want to participate in something that I don't feel is good. And it's unfortunately at the moment, it's the only real business model for most technology, is to harvest users' data to get as many users as possible, use that information to sell to someone at some point, or at very least just to sell adverts. So that's why I don't participate in those areas.
I think it's always refreshing to have some time off social media. I think it's nice to have a break, but at some point it starts to become a bit difficult to not be there for whatever reason. And have you found it, obviously, taking that moral stand?
I don't think it becomes difficult. I just don't think it does. You
haven't had a wobble like where you felt, oh, okay, I might go on it for a little bit, or you've never had
because
that?
I've got, like, for work, we have a Twitter and Instagram, and I use those occasionally to promote the course, and occasionally I'll have to open up the Twitter on, and there's nothing there that I miss, it's just junk, so I use it for work with the purpose of promoting the course, because we want to show photos of what the students are doing and the games they're producing and that kind of stuff. But but whenever I log into it, I don't look, if I have to, I don't look at the timeline, and again, when I used to use Twitter, it didn't have, it didn't have an algorithmic timeline. You could choose, and I used to use third-party clients that slowly got shut down because the API got shut down because Twitter didn't want you using clients that weren't pushing the promoted tweets. And if I ever have accidentally opened up Twitter, it's just it's a storm of like horrendous stuff from what I can tell. You know. So no, I don't miss it, and honestly, I think for most people, they wouldn't miss it, you know. And there's much better places to communicate things and whatever. I mean, I have a blog and I do my own things, but of course, people have got to find those for sure. But
and that's not easy in the world of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. It's not easy to find your blog. Because of that, I think.
Yeah, and that I think that for me is the big problem you see with all of that is the web. When the web came out, I was so excited. I thought, wow, the web is going to democratize so many things, and that was how it was kind of, you know, pitched, and it looked that way. It looked amazing, and now, like the web is Facebook, is Twitter, it's just viewed through those lenses, and those lenses tell you what to do. Even, you know, Google. When you do a Google search, it's trawling but all the previous data to show you things that it thinks you want to know. And for me, you know, when you reinforce the same things over and over again, at the end of the day, normally those reinforcements end up in really bad places like fascism, all those kind of things. And we see it. I mean, we see the world so divided. So I've been aware of that for a long time, and unfortunately, it's still getting worse.
Yeah.
You know.
So moving on to my next question.
Yeah.
Going back to games. What is your favorite game and why? And also, what kind of games don't you like?
Oh my word. Okay. I should have thought I should have guessed you'd ask me the kind of question. So it's difficult to say which is my favorite game, because I find different games give me different feelings. And so so some of them are favorite for different things, you know. And I can give like an intellectual answer to something, so all the students will be like, wow, that game, you know, blah blah blah. What is my favorite game? I mean, my favorite game ever.
Favorite games. You know, I've already told you that Championship Manager was a big favorite of mine when I was 16, and probably didn't do as well in my GCSEs.
And I was reading a big review of the latest Football Manager yesterday. You know, which was Championship Manager, became Football Manager. For me, one of my favorite games ever was probably something like Sensible Soccer and a lot of the Amiga titles, just because they were so fun, and the graphics and whatever were just great fun. It was simple, one button. It was just so playable, you know. In terms of one of my favorite games in sort of what I think really transformed game space is probably something like Little Big Planet, because suddenly you could make your own levels and your own games effectively with a PlayStation controller. And that was really exciting. I thought, wow, okay, again, that's something that could put game making in the hands of many, many people. So that was interesting. You know, at the moment,
and what about games that you dislike? And I'm interested to know why it is that you dislike that sort of game.
Well, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the big titles like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto and that's mainly due to the representation in some of those games. I'm not a fan of war, so I don't particularly want to play a war game, you know, in any kind of capacity. So those for me are kind of personal choices in terms of the types of games that I wouldn't want to personally play. They have their merits in different ways from a technology point of view and that kind of stuff, but for me they're less interesting, you know, in terms of what you kind of gain from them. I want a game that moves me and makes me think, you know. But having said all of that, you know, we'll kind of come on to some of this later, but you know, Battlefield 2042, which has been delayed a little bit, is coming out soon. It's probably going to be one of the biggest selling games going. Obviously, it's a first-person shooter, but in terms of its portrayal of the future of our world, if we don't do something about the climate crisis, that world that Battlefield portrays is quite likely what we could be seeing ourselves in, somewhere that's been ravaged by climate crisis and where people are really, you know, struggling. And that means, unfortunately, when people struggle, conflict will often arise. So, you know, even in that instance, that game can say more than potentially what it looks on the surface, you know.
And I'm not familiar with that game, but that sort of game, is it trying to warn people, do you think, or is it just random that it's like that?
I don't know. I mean, I've watched they've got a couple of little trailers and things and like a little story thing that's in it. So I think they are thinking, I think there is some conscious decisions actually going on in that game, more than maybe we might give them credit for potentially. Is it like really going for that? Well, no. Battlefield sells so many units. They know what works. They know the kind of scenario in war that they want to portray, that players who enjoy that game want. So they're riffing off a very successful series in that sense, but it adds a level of depth for me that I think is quite interesting, just because it's portraying something in the future. But rather than it being this fully dystopian or fully utopian thing, there's actually elements that suggest that this could be down to the political climate changing, the environment climate changing, all that kind of stuff. So
okay.
Yeah.
What are your ambitions in terms of the BA Games Design course that you run? What kind of games designers will you produce from your course, do you think?
It's a good question again. I think a lot of this will cross over as we go forward into what we kind of talk about the bigger. But for me, a lot of it's about creating lifelong learners, people who can learn to adapt and to understand the world and to get employment and all that kind of stuff. And so that can be embedded through different types of education programs, of course. So that's a big piece of it. Generally, it's like, how do people become good citizens of society through the ability to learn and to get on with other people and have empathy and all that kind of stuff. And you can embed that in whatever you deliver, I believe. So there's that part of it. In terms of like game making, for me, the interesting thing for any creatives is that we are in a world that has lots of problems that are very difficult and complex. There's lots of things try to get simple. The thing about Instagram and Facebook and all that, it's all about simple, instant gratification, but the world isn't like that. The world is complex. And so to understand complex things, you have to be able to understand complex systems. And so I think game designers are really placed well to understand that, because they can simulate those systems, they can think about multiple systems, and so that makes them very well placed to go into various employment. And because they're creative, I think that gives them opportunities to think about problems in different ways. And so we found that a lot of the students here, they come out of the course really employable, going into jobs, which is amazing. And that's because of that creativity and that lifelong learning, all those kind of sort of extra skills, not just because they can make games, which of course they can do that as well. So does that answer that question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. So this is moving on to my final question.
Sure.
What does the future look like, do you think, for the games industry? And what changes would you like to see happen?
Well, I think, in terms of the games industry, the future looks insanely bright. It's been going, in terms of its income revenue, if you measure it on that thing alone, it's going up and up and up. In terms of numbers of people playing games, it's almost 4 billion. It's going up and up and up. That isn't going to change. So it's bright in that sense. There's lots more people engaging with those things. What is its kind of, its future? I think where would I like it to be? I'd like it to be more diverse, and much and to cater to more different types of players, those kind of things, and also for us to see games expanding into the technology that games has will expand into more and more of our lives in different ways. Yeah, and I hope will be in positive sort of interactions for our lives. That's it. That's a quick answer on a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. And moving on to a slightly smaller question just before you leave, Adam, I'm very intrigued by your staff profile pic that you seem to have everywhere, and I couldn't work out exactly what this is about. It looks like some kind of weird culty picture. Please explain, because it's been bothering me for a while and I've never asked you. So what's this all about? What's this image about?
So I've always liked a consistency of avatar across all the platforms. So I've always tried to keep an avatar all the time. And I think one of my first avatars on Twitter, I think, was me with my youngest daughter as a baby, sort of next to me. We both had these silly grins, which is quite fun. And I think if you do the right Google search, you can still find that image. Then a guy called Nick White, who's an illustrator who worked at WSA for a little while, really great illustrator. He did a load of postcard stuff and happened to do an illustration of me, which I thought was great. So I used that for a long time. But I was then, I mean, it's ridiculous. There's so much of a story. But so then anyway, I've been developing some work for a PhD, and I wanted to get some sort of illustration and things designed for the PhD. I was really keen at that time to kind of try and illustrate some of my essays with proper illustrations. And I had a games student, Jade, who now works in the games industry as an associate producer, who was really great, really good illustration. And I really liked her style. So for one sort of term, I used some of my sort of PhD funds to get her on board to sort of create some assets for me in terms of illustrations and things. And we did a few little bits and pieces. But one of the things I asked was for a consistent avatar that I said that I felt, or that she felt, represented me. And so she went away and came up with this avatar. And basically, I mean, if you look at it, we've got kind of asteroids and space invaders, obviously, in the background. This is games thing. I obviously have some kind of crazy stare, I'm assuming. But
yeah,
also I don't. Floating head.
The thing that's a bit disturbing, though, is that stare.
Yeah.
You know, and
I guess like, maybe that's my stare.
Your eyes, or
yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's my stare. I'm not really sure. I think I'm shooting something out of the sky with my stare. The floating head is kind of a nod to the old TV show Games Master, which I think is coming back actually. So I liked it, you know, and I don't, you know, and I thought I looked all right. Bit of a comb over, a bit of a messy beard, but you know, so I've kept it for now. And
it's just interesting because it's very different to my second guest's picture that if we got Pascal's picture just before we bring him on, have you got it, Tony? Can you put Pascal's picture up for us?
We'll have to try and bring that in a little bit later in the stream.
Okay, that's fine. All right, well, listen, thank you so much, Adam. It's been really nice to have a chat with you. Thank you very much for coming to Tea Talks. And now, I guess, Tony, it's time to bring on my second guest, Pascal Matthias, BA Senior Teaching Fellow on Fashion Marketing Management course. Hello. Hi, nice to meet you finally.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I'm glad that you haven't got that picture actually, because it looks quite bougie. That picture of.
I just think it looks super cool compared to Adam's, which is a bit disturbing. So, yeah. Okay, so did you bring a drink with you today?
I did. I did. I don't usually drink hot drinks.
Okay.
But I have an Americano, decaf.
Americano.
Yeah.
Okay. Is that because you're feeling a bit tired today?
I think sometimes
busy at WSA.
Yeah, it's been a long day, week with students. So I think the taste of coffee, but not the effect of the caffeine, is close enough for me. Mm-hmm.
So Pascal, obviously you are teaching on the fashion marketing course. I've seen you a couple of times. We've passed at WSA. I usually steal your biscuits that you seem to have in your meetings. But where did your love for fashion start?
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. I didn't study fashion. That's the first thing off the bat. And it's not my first love. I'll tell you that straight. It's a roundabout process. I've always been quite artistic, but I studied in Manchester film and business, and then did a postgraduate in film. So it was always my intention to work in the film industry, and I did for a while, making short films around about the time the century, which seems quite weird to say, but 2000. So, but I then changed and migrated towards fashion because it was just more immediate. It was at a time where I was designing for brands on the high street, but designing for independent brands as well, and a lot of American brands. So as soon as I finished university, I went traveling, went backpacking across America, made lots of contacts, was going to work in the film industry, came back, and then kind of met a lot of people that were in fashion. So I started working with Top Man, eventually worked with New Look, a brand called UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles. So
and what kind of things did you do for them?
it was all menswear. So it was all menswear, very streetwear orientated, very young. But it was exciting and it was really interesting. So I kind of always...
They must have seen something in you, because if you weren't at all, you didn't study fashion, there must have been something that
yeah, I guess so.
saw.
I think I've always had that eye, a creative eye. I think, you know, to allude to what Adam said as well, the way I teach, the way that I think critically is not to compartmentalize these disciplines and think, okay, you're going to end up as a fashion designer, you're going to end up as a games designer, but to be able to think laterally, to be able to think across different disciplines with depth, with empathy, with the need to know how to problem solve is really important. So I used to problem solve within the film with, you know, 4x3, 16.9 with a camera, and then just kind of switched and pivoted to working with a sewing machine, pattern cutting, working with fabric. So different outcomes, outcomes, but same processes. You know, I think the initial research, the development are the same. You know, the way that we see is crucial, and I try and pass that on to students as well. I think they're very similar. I know that, you know, Adam's design students, my fashion marketing and management students, the design, fashion design students, graphic students, all work through processes of research, developing those ideas, critically analyzing those ideas, synthesizing those ideas with others, testing them, and then you come out with the outcome. So it's more about the process. So yeah. I've been lucky to work in lots of different kind of areas, and fashion has just been the one that's stuck, really.
Mm-hmm. I read somewhere that you actually have your own fashion label. Do you still have your own fashion label? Are you still designing for that?
I do bits. Yeah, I do bits.
Can you describe your style, your fashion label, what it's about?
It has shifted in the last, since I've been at WSA, it has shifted. I was designing for a brand, streetwear brand, Williamson-Dickies, and another American brand, tend to just always work with American brands. And then was doing a lot of my own work back on there, a lot of freelance work, but I've really pivoted away from that, really, and kind of entered a much more, I work now with students, young people, organizations. I started an organization which we'll probably talk about, We Are Face, which looks at social injustice and racial equality. So I'm much more involved now in the space which is racial equality, or racial inequality, shall I say. And I moved away from fashion, not because I've fallen out of love with it, because I feel that they're crucial areas within the industry that need to be addressed. So rather than just continuously design, which I was, which is great, I think the world has enough designers, doesn't have enough people speaking up on the injustices that permeate fashion every day and education. So I'm looking at both those spaces, the kind of the industry and in education, and looking at how creativity, like Adam alluded to as well, needs to be more diverse.
It's funny you've mentioned FACE, which you co-founded. Fashion Academics Creating Equality is what it stands for. And I wondered, you've spoken a little bit about that change, but I wondered what motivated you to start this, and I wondered, had you encountered inequality during your career?
Yeah.
Had you encountered that? Is that part of the motivation? And could you talk a bit about that?
Yes. I'm not sure if motivation's the right adjective. I think I had a realization. 2020 was for me a moment which was a crucial moment in terms of reflection after the murder of George Floyd. And I think for me, it wasn't a motivation to do more. It was a reflection on actually a lot of things that were suppressed within my career, education, and my career within education, my career outside of education in the fashion industry, and my own education all the way through to HE post-grad. And yeah, I basically just said enough is enough, and I don't want to not speak about it anymore. So I knew that I was one of only a handful of Black academics on my particular campus. I always felt marginalized, minoritized. I'm always the minority in a room, in a conversation. So I wanted
just
to
out of interest, I'm from London originally, and one of the things that I noticed when I came to live down in the southwest is the lack of diversity generally in this area. So do you think that's something that is kind of particular to the southwest in terms of higher education and the population in general, or do you think that's even in London, even in the academic world there?
I think London always gets kind of marked as being multicultural. Take London aside, all universities are very much the same in terms of diversity. There's a lack of Black and brown academics in universities, especially as you rise up to senior level. London is an anomaly because it's multicultural. It's a different city. Take New York, take London, take LA, Paris out of it, and then you look at the system wide, and you can see that statistics there's a alarmingly kind of deficit of Black academics. And I never really spoke about it. I mentioned it, I would have conversations, but I wasn't as vocal about it until 2020. I was just designing. I was part of the fashion industry in a way that I was quite grateful to be one of the lucky ones. I'm quite privileged in terms of I've had a good education. I've worked through the industry. I didn't study fashion. It's been great. But there are many like me, many students like me that are not so fortunate. And this is not an issue for me around just race, the construct of race, of a Black and white and that oppositional. It's actually having a system within university that is fully inclusive. We're talking about gender, I'm talking about age, I'm talking about care leavers. I chair the subcommittee for access, participation and progression, which is something that's come out of my work that I've been doing with FACE. So this is not just an issue about race, it's all the intersections. And I think education really needs to look at itself, reflect on it. So, going back to the original question, I'm still 100% in fashion, but I will aid fashion, accelerate fashion's growth by making sure it's more diverse and inclusive, hopefully.
Yeah. What would you like to see change? What are the major things? And how do you see that changing?
So I have 4 pillars. So co-founding FACE, I have 4 pillars. There's lots of different groups that will look at inequalities and say it needs to be this, it needs to be that. For me, within education, within fashion in particular, 4 things. The first one for me is recruitment of staff and recruitment of students. It is nowhere near good enough. There are so many inflection points that enable inequalities, from job specs to interview panels to language. It's just there. Not to be debated, just needs to be changed. No one's fault, but there are systems and policies in play that enable discrimination, bias, whatever you want to call it. That's the first one, recruitment. The second one's progression. You can look at any institution in the UK and you can look at professors and you will know that they all look similar. Okay, and I can guarantee you can guess what they look like, what their gender is, what their sex is, what their race, age are. Okay, that's the second thing that needs to be looked at, the progression. When you look at students and you look at the attainment gap, and lots of work's been done around the attainment gap, we know that for non-UK students, for care leavers, for mixed heritage students, the attainment gap is huge. They do not fare as well in education. That's not to say it's around individual academics or lectures. There's systems that don't enable that equality. So that's the second thing. The third thing is the curriculum. The curriculum has historically inherently been biased. It has. I know there's a lot of work around decolonization, etc. But it dawned on me that my own education was very narrow. It dawned on me that still what we teach is very narrow and very shallow. Myself and my team, not my team, I work within a great team within fashion management and marketing, but we teach on a global perspective because fashion is a global organization. We cannot teach from a Eurocentric point of view. All of our students benefit.
And you also get quite a lot of international students, don't you, on the course, generally?
We do, but I tend not to call them international students because I think that kind of marginalizes them as well. They're non-UK domiciles to me. We have this kind of positioning of internationals and UK students, and that is also problematic. And I know didn't mean anything about it, but we have this framework. We have international students, and international students don't fare as well. I think we need to start looking at that and saying, actually, what does international mean? Because we're international. We're all international. They're just non-UK domiciles. And what happens is we teach from a perspective, Southeast Asian, Southern Asian, East Asia, China, Africa, the Middle East, and make sure that fashion is reflected through all the modules and all the texts that we do. We make sure that we have a diverse range. We make sure that students reflect on the fact that have they ever referenced Black authors, female authors, Middle Eastern authors, Chinese authors? And that's really important if they want to go out in the world. So that's the third thing, curriculum. And I know I'm going on, but I think it's important. And the final
thing, something that is actively changing on your course, though, because you are obviously a senior lecturer on there now. Is that something that you are changing?
I would say so, yeah. I would say that it's changing ever so slowly at WSA and the university. I would say that our university listens, acknowledges, accepts the kind of position it is in. And I think there are good things happening, but there's so much more that needs to happen. The final fourth pillar was culture. The culture needs to change. And I know a lot of work is being done around that, but it is starting to change, but not quick enough. The very thing that started my movement towards social equality, if you want to call that racial equality, was the pandemic, the intersection of the pandemic and George Floyd. And I had a post on Instagram, which went viral, tens of thousands of people that just said, treat racism like COVID-19, assume that you have it. And it kind of like connected with a lot of people. And I think a lot of people can understood that we just said to protect other people, to think about other people, rather than remove yourself, decentralize yourself. We did certain things in 2020 for the last 18 months that weren't really always benefiting us, but benefiting the other. Wash your hands, social distance, stay at home. If we can start to take that mentality and remember those lessons and kind of allay them to other parts of our life, education, how we teach, I feel that it will be much more beneficial for everybody. The problem is we just bounce back and we recover and go back to what the norm. And it wasn't normal for many groups pre-2020. It was kind of abnormal for lots of people, students, academic staff, people of color, women, disabilities, to be within a system, to be working in an industry that didn't reflect them, didn't appreciate them. So yeah, that's my life goal, really, to make people think about others in a way that we did for a second in 2020.
And how do you see this happening in the short term? So what are you working on next for these goals?
So much. Don't stop. Do not stop working. We had I'm in conversation, not even just conversation, with the Office for Students. We will last year we set up a survey for students, all students, not just Black, but all students of all races, all ethnicities, to ask them about their education. Do they feel that their education's been fair? Do they feel it's been unbiased? Do they feel that they've been reflected? 4 questions, very simple. And we had nearly 1,000 participants from all over. The thing about FACE is it's set up for Black, brown, white academics in about 60, 70 institutions in the UK, Scotland as well. So
Wow.
they, I've given presentations to other universities. We've given presentations to the British Fashion Council, CHEED, and what we aim to do is amplify those voices to make sure there's change in every single institution. So we're working with that. The findings from our survey will be out possibly just after Christmas. We started a Black Excellent Prize. If you look at Graduate Fashion Week for fashion, or if you look at the prizes that are usually giving out, they are alarmingly do not reflect diversity. So we started our own. My aim is to kind of circumnavigate and not to shame, but to say actually these people exist. You're just not seeing them. So we had our Black Excellent Prize as well. We're working with a fashion. You probably know him, Christopher Kane, a top UK designer who gives over his Instagram platform for an online zine for Black and brown students. And these are students that could be from fashion management, marketing, design, games, to give them the space to amplify them and their work. And the last edition, the traffic was phenomenal. The students got recognition from Vogue, Vogue Italia, Vogue US, WWD, some really great stuff.
Incredible.
Opportunities. So yeah, it just shows that with a little bit of work and coming together, then you can build something that's beneficial for all as well. And
I think Tony's just saying that he's sharing all that in the links and giving links to the people that are watching.
Yeah, www.weareface.uk, and you'll see the website.
Thank you so much, Pascal. It's been so interesting to talk to you. Thank you for coming. I'm going to pass back now to Tony, and I think he's going to introduce the Research Cafe part of today's program. So thank you very much, everyone.
Indeed, yeah, that was fascinating. Just that kind of informal listening in the background to the experiences that Adam and Pascal have had in their kind of careers, and the informal bits of tea talks is great. I've just finished my tea, by the way, and so we'll move on now to the second bit of the evening. And for this, we really want audience participation. So encourage you as much as possible to ask questions in the chat, and these will be fed through to our 2 academics who are with us tonight, or just post some comments on what they're talking about. So for those of you that don't know the Research Cafe, this is number 41 of a series that's been running for a good 5 or 6 years now. They're usually in person, but sometimes they're online like tonight. And this is really an informal way that people can have a discussion about research in particular areas. But it is always supposed to be informal and audience led. So do please get involved. So I'm going to bring Adam and Pascal into the stream just now, and they're going to discuss their research and teaching areas, which are games and fashion marketing, as you've heard a little bit about already. But also what we'll come on to now in the discussion is the positive social impact that these two areas can have. So without further ado, Adam and Pascal, I'll bring up a slide in a moment with your kind of just a few bullet point reminders of what you're going to talk about. But over to you, just to really start introducing your research and teaching areas in that context.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, I mean, when we were approached for this cafe, I thought what would be quite fun and provocative would be think about, where often when people think about games and they think about fashion, there's connotations as to exactly where they sit. And so I thought it would be good fun for us to discuss some of the areas that I know myself and Pascal are keenly interested in, is where that fits to a betterment of society and to people and that kind of stuff. So we've tried to tee this up around that sort of concept as to how games and fashion can be seen in a positive light, because often I think sometimes people don't necessarily see it that way, particularly in the mainstream. I mean, Pascal, would you agree with that?
I totally do agree with that, Adam. I kind of joke with on open days that people look at the fashion industry and it's not critiqued to the level of, and I'm sure that's the same with games, with other art forms, like maybe fine art, maybe fashion design. What is marketing? What is management? What do you do? I had someone last week say to me, "Oh, fashion, that's exciting." And, I'm sure it's, but what do you do? And I said, well, when you look at it, there's fashion, we all wear clothes. There's two things we kind of generally do. We eat and we wear clothes. And, if you don't do those every day, then there's possibly an issue. And I said, but to get those clothes to store, to try and look about the sustainable, all the things that we talk about around the climate, how we look at appropriation, how we look at gender identity, all these different things, how we look at fabric innovation, how we market, the effects of marketing, social media impact, color stories, narratives, all these things are really structured and framed from fashion management, marketing, the stories that we tell. And I know that's the same with you around games and play and games, and that inherent self-actualization is really important in terms of those creative elements that are there. But to teach them, understand them, but more importantly, change them and make them better going forward is really, really important. And people possibly don't give as much justice for games and fashion marketing as they should. It's kind of like, oh, we kind of understand what it is, but there's so much more.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we've got these questions that we kind of propose for ourselves, and I'll kind of rewind something. I thought, so for me, obviously I've been in technology in lots of different ways and seen technology and been to lots of things. And for me, one of the things I saw when I went to lots of technology events was discrimination, particularly towards anyone who wasn't a white man, and particularly towards women in technology. And it sort of, it surprised me. It surprised me when I went to some events and I heard the stories and things, and I thought, wow, this I just didn't get it. I didn't understand it, but I could see it. And I have 3 daughters, and I want them to achieve whatever they want to achieve. And I suddenly saw that this area that I thought was so exciting and innovative, in particular around technology, of course, games predominantly comes out of technology to begin with. I thought, wow, it's kind of a bit of a barrier. And then, of course, when you think about it, the products we see mainly on the shelves tend to look like they aim at teenage boys, and I did some research and looked at the sort of, areas around engineering and that technology, and why it seemed that there'd been this kind of mass appeal to mainly white boys. And then they would obviously then become mainly the people making the technology, and thus it perpetuates that problem, And of course, there were moments in time when that wasn't the case. So things changed and bits and pieces really pushed it. So lots of women came out of technology from the sort of after the 60s and 70s for various reasons. Lots of marketing of technology and game products was aimed at boys. You know, all the marketing for the Spectrum, the Commodore, all that kind of stuff was clearly aimed at boys. And so that to me was interesting, I thought, in general. And then with games, I've always been interested in games. And I started to see that games, you know, are moving from being the kind of thing that nerds would want to play to sort of mass media, obviously, and realized that there was a space for more diverse and different people to be making games, and thought this would be interesting. And democratization of technology and those kind of things has always been something I was interested in. So when it came to making a games course, which I put together at the university, most other courses that existed were catering to the same sort of technology and business model, and were attracting and recruiting the same types of students, which was problematic, because when you start to dig into the data and look at it, I think I mentioned earlier, there's almost 4 billion people that say they play video games. There's probably more who don't admit it. But when you look at those players that are out there, it's about a 50-50 split. If you do if you look at gender in a binary fashion, of course, there's more, you know, there's other types of people who play games as well, who don't identify with either of those. In terms of, like, when you think about who plays games, again, when you look at the stats, there's more middle-aged women that are playing screen-based games than teenage boys. But what we see in Tesco's or wherever is games that appeal to teenage boys. So one of the reasons for me creating a games course in the way that I did it at the university level was to say, actually, games can do way more. They can speak to more people than anyone else. So it's the biggest entertainment industry on the planet. It needs to speak to people. If stories are being consumed in games more than film and TV combined, then there needs to be more diversity in terms of who it speaks to. And when you look at the games industry, it's getting slowly better. But when you looked at it, the makeup of the makers within the games industry just didn't match the makeup of the players. And so for me, you know, a lot of people would probably, and this was the question I put here, was, you know, studying games at university, surely, you know, that sounds a bit silly. But when you say that games is a huge platform to speak to people, then you need to be speaking to people in positive ways and speaking to as broad an audience as possible, because there's power in that sort of that thing. And I'll give one example, and then we'll talk about fashion marketing and its positive role. So, I mean, there's loads of examples I can give of games, but the one that stood out for me that I always go back to is there was a game that was produced with the Wellcome Trust, a game called Hellblade. Quite a violent game, I think. It's not my kind of game, but in that game, they basically worked with people who suffered from psychosis, and one of the main effects of psychosis is that you hear voices all the time. And so in this game, when you're playing in your headphones, you're hearing voices all the time telling you to do things, etc. And some of the comments when the game was first being played was like, they were asking, where's the setting to turn the voices off? Well, of course, you can't do that in real life. You can't turn the voices off. So that was eye-opening for those individuals who thought, can I just turn that off, please? It's really annoying and not helping me. And then I went to a Women in Games conference, and a woman stood up there and said that after playing that game, it was the first, and this was an older woman, she maybe in her 30s or 40s. She said after playing that game, it was the first time that she understood the condition that her mother had suffered with for years. And that's one person. And I just thought, wow, you know, that a game that you could look at and say, this is just an entertaining game, which some people would look at it in that way, actually has the power, because they worked with people who had those problems, those neurodiversity, all that kind of stuff, to make something that was really powerful. And it got at least one person to go, wow, I didn't know how much this was affecting my mum. And I think that's the amazing power for me of games. So
yeah, I totally agree, Adam. I think the power of games and the power of fashion marketing is a powerful tool, and it has that power, that position, that privilege to speak to many on a daily basis. You know, there's statistics that say that on any given day, someone will look at between 6,000 and 10,000 different ads. So you're being bombarded. We are tethered to information, and we are marketed, we are tracked, we're harvested in very, very complex ways that we don't even know, you know, through sound, through movement, through technology that just allows us to ring fence us and know exactly where we are and what we're doing, what we're watching, what we're saying. So I feel that then that social responsibility, that power that's wielded by fashion and games should really be used in a certain way of positivity and purpose and value. I really think that that's fashion's new role that it can have. And, you know, I talk a lot around race, but, you know, we are in this sociological, ecological position at the moment where fashion needs to do more and can speak more to more people. We're coming up to Black Friday, and you know, Black Friday is possibly bigger than Christmas in terms of revenue, but also more damaging in terms of, you know, sustainable issues as well. And that needs to be looked at. So how we teach is understanding the techniques and the frameworks and the theory around how these things work, and then really questioning their purpose and their value as we move forward into a new world. And I think that's where games and the intersection of games and fashion are. They're at a position at the moment to actually do good, to actually say, actually, we can really help people understand psychosis. We can really help with the climate crisis. We can really say something about racial inequalities, gender inequalities, etc. And I feel that once we have students that look different, think differently, coming through university systems, which have traditionally been very narrow and very shallow and a very Eurocentric white curriculum culture, then we will see change happen. And I don't believe it has to be slow. I believe it could be. We saw things with the pandemic that I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime. You know, stay at home. If someone had said to me in a year's time, people are going to say stay at home and you're not allowed out and you will not be able to see your family for 6 months, I would have said, what are you talking about? That never happened. But we did it. So I feel that actually where people say, actually Rome, someone said to me once, oh, you know, we have to take our time around racial inequality. Rome wasn't built in a day. And I said to him, I'm not trying to build Rome, I'm trying to dismantle Rome, you know, and Pompeii was flattened in hours, you know, so we can look at really dismantling some of these things that we talk about. And like you know, we have conversations as well. We're talking about actually, why do we do that? Why are we asking these questions? Why are we asking and framing ourselves in a certain way? Because we've been inherited. So rather than become much more stringent and robust, I love to ask my students questions. And they said to me, last year we had, you know, a very strange year. There were no black first year level 1 students that came through, not one. This year, and they said to me, you know, it really impacts us because we come from multicultural backgrounds, and where we come from, there's lots of black people who come here and we feel that we're missing out on the kind of nuances and intricacies of learning with different cultures. This year, so much more diverse of the work that we've been doing as a team in a university. I know that you've become much more diverse in your cohort as well, which means that the conversations change and you're kind of mapped in a very different way, which means that you have to think a little bit quicker on your feet, a little bit wider, with a bit more depth, with a more empathy. And I feel that's only going to enrich your learning. Both of the students and the staff and the university, the whole culture changes. So I feel that once we see that, we start to have much more enrichment in terms of fashion marketing becoming much more purposeful, much more valuable, much more sustainable, which it needs to be, and not centralizing profit, but really looking at a purpose and what it can do. And lots of people will say, you know, but the main aim is to be profitable, and I think the main aim is to help to have a purpose, and that will become profitable. You know, you can be the conscientious capitalist if you want to, and really secure people's minds. There are brands that do that. There are brands like Patagonia, there's brands like Pangea, that really look at the planet. And we're starting to see our students think in a different way as well and move away from fast fashion. I think the CEO of Zalando in Europe said in the next 10 years, fast fashion has to die. It has to go, you know, and it has to be legislated to say, actually, if you can get a top for 50p on Black Friday, there's something wrong with the system. So
no, I think that's great. I mean, in terms of, I mean, there's so much stuff in there in terms of like the diversity at WSA and the university. I think I think a big piece for me is, like you say, that learning and having that you can't really develop empathy unless you're exposed, you know, and Bell Hooks talks about exposing yourself to everyone, different social statuses, all that kind of stuff. And I try and encourage the students to think about that. And of course, in games, we've been really fortunate from the beginning to have a high population of female students, which bucks the trend of games courses, really does. And that's been an active, you know, I've had to be active in terms of the selection of images, the kind of things we talk about, the language we use, all that kind of stuff. And over in the last year, you know, we've attracted a good number of Black and brown students, which is great. We always have a good mix of gender diversity, actually, you know, in the program, which is really good. But I think for me, some of these, it's that idea of just continuing to learn and not being afraid to sometimes of getting things wrong, you know. So I know, like, I've learned something over the last year or so where we had my mother-in-law is quite disabled, and so that has made me really aware of the environment in lots of ways that I wasn't as aware of, because suddenly you realize things that you think take for granted are really difficult to overcome. And again, on the program, we've got students with different abilities in terms of their bodies. And so, you know, we do a lot of things where we do workshops and activities that involve, you know, marker pens, big bits of paper, post-it notes, all that kind of stuff. And of course, if you have limited mobility, those things are suddenly barriers. And of course, it dawned on me, it's ridiculous when these things do dawn on you, but they do, right? It dawned on me that, of course, no wonder the built environment is so terrible for individuals who have limited mobility, because some of the techniques and tools and processes we use to encourage people into creative roles and design, etc., don't work for people with limited mobility. So they don't go into those roles. So, you know, again, it's kind of obvious. Some of these things you think, well, afterwards, you think, wow, it's obvious. But of course, you've got to have I think to some degree, you've got to have the courage, haven't you, to think, actually, I need to think differently about this. I need to bring this in. I need to add stuff.
Ask. That's why the number one thing is for me, recruitment. Recruit a diverse cohort of students that are not all able-bodied, white, privileged from Surrey. You know, look at the diversity, and you change the conversation, because you're going to have someone come in. I've had the privilege to teach the most fantastic students, from less able-bodied to deaf students to neurodiverse students, and they have taught me so much. Students from, you know, across the globe, and they not encourage me, they make me have to be a better academic. You know, they make me think in a different way. Otherwise, I would just be thinking in that narrow way, which is dangerous, you know, and violent, really. I think it is violent to be thinking in the same way as I was 10 years ago, you know, 20 years ago, and think, okay, I'm still here in this. I want to wake up each morning and think, what do I need to do better? How do I need to think in a different way? A student came up to me just a couple of weeks ago and said, you know, actually, I'm finding it difficult to read a lot of this text. Audio is so much easier for me. And I thought, right, yeah, I love audiobooks as well. It is easier. Like, let's have a look at this. There's a system. So got some software. And I said, right, every piece of software you have, I have it as a PDF. You can read it out to you or record it. We'll just do audio files now. So you can listen to it on the go as well and have that extra layer, because the student of today is very different to the student that we were, you know, when we were at university. They just said, right, here's some paper, here's a pen, take notes, you know, and we all know how difficult that was. So, you know, that notion of standing in front of a lot of students and just talking at them and expecting them to actually learn that in a very different world is just, you know, it's ridiculous. So I definitely agree. I think the more, ask them, recruit people, recruit staff that are diverse and different.
Yeah.
And then of all ages, of all experiences, not just staff that have particular characteristics or particular degrees or PhDs from industry that say, actually, I come from a different route. I have a different way of thinking, because it will only enrich. Obviously, you need to be able to do the job. But I feel that it's that inclusivity and that inclusiveness that brings that enrichment to any classroom, any university, and it adds and aids the culture, definitely.
So I mean, that's, yeah, I totally agree. Obviously, with all of that. This is one thing I was going to ask you, Pascal, which so, you know, I've been concerned about the environment for a long, long time, and so I've been vegan for a number of years because of that, and tried to think consciously about my engagement with the world. And I always remember that, when Walmart started introducing like cruelty-free products, all that kind of stuff, it was because the consumer wanted those things more than anything else. And I went to the cinema to watch Dune, which I really enjoyed. I haven't been to the cinema for years, but I wanted to see that film. And so I don't expose myself to many adverts, but there was an advert. Obviously, I had to then sit through the adverts. There was an advert from Levi's about like their jeans and basically keeping them for longer and not using as many. And now, when I saw that marketing, all I thought cynically was like, "What? This doesn't make any sense to Levi's model. Like they're just trying to tell me, but don't they just want to sell tons of jeans? So so how do you see those things? Do you think there is a bit of cynicism from some areas? And obviously, like you've talked about, there's people going in and changing things. I don't know much about Levi's as a brand, but it just made me think, well, what are they doing?
I think a lot of brands are trying. They're trying. I think that a lot of brands like Levi's, like Nike, are trying. Nike have got, their Nike Space Hippie grind. It's 25% recyclable sneaker. It's not enough. It's 25%. There's 75% of the sneaker that's not recyclable, and there's 99% of their whole, product range which is not recyclable. It's not enough. I feel the number one thing, the most immediate thing, and I talked a lot about immediacy that we can do, is reduce. You're a vegan. I've tried to reduce my meat content because I've grown up. I've grown up as a meat eater. So for me to stop, which eventually I would love to, would be very, very difficult. So I've just reduced. I just want a whole week of not eating meat. I feel that if you then apply those kind of principles to fashion, and you look at how you can reduce your consumption, we overconsume. And marketing plays a huge role in that. So the number one thing that I feel that marketing can do to become much more conscious and conscientious is to look at how much they ask us to buy, and do we need that? If it was food and not fashion, we'd be like, we've got too much. It's waste in the fridge. The cupboards are full. I need to kind of consume some of this. But with fashion, where we see our wardrobes, where we see pile of jeans, shoes, we hardly see or wear, we then think we only wear about 20% of our wardrobe. The rest of it is kind of just like hanging there, and we just continue this seasonal trend to buy more. So I feel that I haven't seen the advert, but I feel that there is a level of cynicism because it's new and it's different. But also someone says, actually, how many do you want? I think if you want to buy more expensively and buy less, that's possibly a good thing. It's possibly a good thing in terms of fast fashion is really accelerating overconsumption and the impact on the environment, the waste. And here's the thing, here's a stat that I give to my students, that clothing doesn't go anywhere. There's no away. There's no, we've recycled it, we've gone away. Clothing, when it's made, especially from kind of virgin polyester and nylons, is there forever. So clothes from the 1960s, 30s, 40s, 1910s still exist here, somewhere buried in the ground. It's easier to recycle a car than it is to recycle the outfit that you've got on, the outfit that I've got on today.
Wow.
So where we're at the moment is not enough is being done. You can take a car, you can recycle the rubber, you can recycle the aluminium, the bits, that you can use them again. You can't reverse the cycle of manufacturing of clothing. It doesn't go anywhere. You can't make it into something else. Take the fibers and make it into. People have tried. They're trying. There's the technology there. That might be there in 20 years, 10 years, hopefully. But at the moment, it's a linear process, and we need to close that loop. The best way, I think, at the moment is just to buy less, to have something that you will wear more than once a week, that you will keep for more than a year, 2 years, 3 years, you know. And I think that's, to get that message out to the younger generation, Gen Z, millennials, is really difficult, because they're impressed by newness, and we're always impressed by newness, shiny things, Apple phones, etc. You know, every 2 years. Why? You know, Apple have just this week come out and said you can fix your own phone. About time.
Yes.
You know.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I'm just gonna jump. Can I just jump in for one comment on there, because you've actually just come right into my own research area, which is waste management. And so, yeah, just to add that comment, that we try to kind of follow and put into place the waste hierarchy, you know, and that goes reduce, reuse, recycle. So that first one, reduce, is the highest one that can have most impact, and that's exactly what, Pascal, you've just been talking about, trying not to over consume and get rid of this consumer society. And there, where we can't, or, you know, with the existing materials we do have, then try and reuse them where you can, because that's environmentally better. And where that's not possible, then at least try and recycle rather than just dispose of.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could talk about this for ages. I mean, Pascal, you're mentioning Apple now putting out the manual that you can repair your phones and whatever. And I've repaired quite a few iPhones just from watching YouTubes and whatever, because my daughters seem to be very good at breaking phones, which is great, you know, and I quite like the fun of it, because I used to make computers and whatever. But that the Apple thing is really interesting, because I think there's again, the cynicism around that is that they'll be under pressure actually for the group, which is the right to repair. So the right to repair is sort of something that's being pushed through in legislation, and Apple are sort of trying to get ahead of that by saying, well, we've given out the manuals. But of course, some of the bits in that are really near on impossible to repair as an individual, which is, you know, so again, I think, there's tons. I mean, the thing with games, in terms of like streaming, you know, streaming games, you know, that's obviously a big thing of Google Stadia and other platforms. But of course, that uses a whole ton of energy just to get the game to you, you know, and more energy from the servers and whatever than probably shipping the disc around the world. But of course, all the consoles are going to no discs. So all these things, I think, I mean, for us, as we know, we're educators, you know, we're teaching people how to go into society and to live good lives and to be citizens that promote and provide, you know, positive interactions. I think we have to keep thinking about these things and keep, like you say, get up every morning and think, okay, what can I make sure that people are aware of and thinking about, and how can I impress that there may be other ways of doing things, and that we haven't quite got there yet. And I love the thing you said about COVID in terms of, like, you know, it's suddenly flipped, isn't it? And I think you're right. We could go faster with stuff, couldn't we? There could be tipping points for the consumption of fashion. There could be tipping points for people really getting on board with the environment and understanding people through games and all that kind of stuff. We just need to kind of push on it, don't we?
I definitely think, there's a lack of acknowledgement. I'm just reading the comment from the chat here, in the comments, thinking we have to be careful about positive discrimination as well as negative discrimination, about labeling certain categories. So saying students from Surrey is not to say that they're privileged, or to say that we don't want students from all over. I'm just looking at a much more inclusive and diverse cohort. Like I said, my students came back to me. A lot of them happen to be from Surrey, Hertfordshire, from surrounding areas, Sussex. And what we have is it's not about privilege. The social economics are much more complex, about saying you're privileged, you're at university, or you're white. It's not. It's the systems and procedures that I'm looking at to make sure that they're much more inclusive. They're much more, we're going out further. We're not just being kind of narrow in our thinking. That's inherent thinking. We've always done the same thing in the same way. We've always gone to the same sort of colleges. We've always taken the same cohort. We've always had the same people giving open days. We look around the kind of diversity of our helpers, our student helpers on open days as well, to make sure that they reflect the people coming in as well. There's small things that come in. I'm doing the open day on Saturday. So it's not about, you know, an ethos that encourages inclusive and mutual understanding. It's the acknowledgement that we are where we are as well. And I'm quite unapologetic about that, that if you look at the statistics across all universities, not just Southampton University, that the statistics are alarming. It's not for me to kind of go on about statistics, the data. We can be data driven or vision driven. It's just where we are. And this where we look at inclusion and we look at diversity, we look at equality, it's for the benefit of all. It's for the benefit of those students that don't have access to multiculturalism, that will go out into the industry and think, oh, actually, I've never come across someone that has had psychosis. I've never thought about that before. I've never thought what it is like to be marginalized or minoritized as a Black person, or as a man with my privilege, and I do have privilege as a man, as an able-bodied man, to think, oh, actually, I have to think about, you know, women in the street, like, you know, all the things that happen around society at the moment, and think about my own privilege and my own thinking around that as well with my students. One final thing I say is I did a kind of a course where it kind of just dawned on me. I go into a lecture theatre all the time and I'm like, hi guys, are you okay? And like you said, around pronouns and how you address people, there's no disrespect meant by that, but it's also a non-inclusive language, you know. So I've stopped saying that as much as I can remember, and make sure that I use much more inclusive language, and not to offend or ask people their pronouns as well, or have my pronouns announced when I'm introducing myself. So it's small things that can become much more, give them a greater sense of belonging to people within a university. And that's not to exclude, it's just to highlight, going back to the point in the comments, of where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
And to acknowledge that we're nowhere near where we should be.
No, I totally agree. I think that's the thing is, like you say, there's a bunch of different angles. I know we're going to be wrapping up, but it's kind of like there's plenty of courses and feeders that happen to be supplying the games industry with lots of white game makers.
Yeah,
they, you know, and they will struggle to recruit that diversity to begin with because they don't have it, you know. And so I embedded from the beginning of our program to have that diversity and I'm not ashamed to say that I encouraged and went about making sure that it focused on areas that I knew the games industry needed support in to provide for the diversity of players and to do all those things around empathy and all that kind of stuff. And there's games around migration, there's games around cancer, all kinds of amazing stuff. And so for me, and again, the last bit is that there's a really great book called Mismatch, which is about designing spaces for inclusivity in terms of, and that's mainly around able-bodied and accessibility. But it talks about mismatch, and it talks about this idea that if you look at the mismatches that exist in a design and you try and reduce those mismatches as much as possible, what you end up doing is designing something that is way better for everyone. And if you and I don't have the stuff off the top of my head, but when we look at the built environment in particular, where they have thought about the inclusive nature of the built environment, those spaces are better for everyone.
Yeah,
and that's the thing for me, is that when you realize that diversity is better for everyone, some of us have got to still champion it right now because there's too many people that look like me running lots of things for people like me, and I'm not the only person in the planet. And the planet is in a bad place because we've been too focused on individuals and whatever. We want to think about, like you say, everyone, differences, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, great.
100%. Decentralize ourselves, centralize the other, and we're start to move together. And I think, you know, and finally, because I know we're going to wrap up, and that, you know, my other, and please do go to kind of Faith's website, and I talk about the four P's, which are privilege, position, power, and purpose. And we all have them. Doesn't matter what race, what ethnicity, what sex, what gender, what age you are. We all have them. I have them. I talk a lot about race, but I have privilege. I have power. I'm able-bodied. I have a position. I have a platform. I can talk about that. And what I'm trying to do, aim to do as an academic, as a person, as a human, as a father of four, is to make sure that I am always amplifying and championing the other the marginalised and minoritized, whoever they may be. They may be black, they may be a woman, they may be less able-bodied, they may be different age, different ethnicity, whatever. And if we can do that, I feel that then we create a sense of belonging, a sense of inclusivity. But we do need to acknowledge where we are. We have to acknowledge ourselves in that problem. And if we don't, then we continue to deny progression.
I think that's a great point to finish on. An optimistic note, whilst still obviously highlighting the many challenges that we still have to come across in, not only in your specific research areas, but we've talked about so much more over the last 1.25 hours as well. So I'm just going to bring Belinda back into the stream briefly to say, for us all, to say thank you to those that have been watching, whether it's the live stream or in future on live demand, this recording. And yeah, I've posted in the chat, so you can click on those links to the T-Talks site, where other T-Talks videos are and where this recording will be as well. And also there's been links in the chat to both Adam and Pascal's areas, and you've heard just snippets of them over the last hour or so, and it's really highlighted how there's fascinating nuggets within kind of people's lives, research, teaching areas, and we could have spent so much longer talking about them. So I do encourage you to look at those resources to find out more if you'd like to. So unless Belinda, Pascal, or Adam would like to make any final comments, no, then I will say thanks on behalf of those, and then we'll all say goodbye, and then I'm just going to stay on for one more minute and give you a few more final links. So thanks and goodbye from Belinda, Adam, and Pascal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, I am just posting in the comments, and I'm going to share the screen again for a moment, our little feedback form. So it'd be great if you could spend just a minute or two to either click on that link in the chat or snap that QR code with your camera and give us a little bit of feedback on tonight's event, which will really help us to make events like this better in future. As you know, this has been part of the Southampton Arts and Humanities Festival, and you can see the full link list of remaining events, as well as the big Hands on Humanities Day festival on Saturday, by clicking on the links that I will post in the chat in a moment, or that you can see on screen at the moment. And the final thing I wanted to say is this has been Research Cafe 41 as well as T-Talks. Research Cafe 42 is closely following this in just a couple of weeks' time. And I'm happy to say this is part of and really focusing in on UK Disability History Month, which plays in a little bit to the diversity element of what Adam and Pascal were just talking about. UK Disability History Month began today, and it runs for the next month through to the 18th of December. And as part of that, Research Cafe 42 will be taking place on Friday, the 3rd of December from 3:30 to 4:45 p.m. This one is going to be in person. There may be some recording online afterwards as well available. But we'll have 3 different speakers talking about various aspects of disabilities and how we can be more responsive and inclusive in society, in Southampton specifically, but also in general. I will post a link in the chat in just a few seconds to the Disability History Month website, where you can check out the Research Cafe 42, but also the whole range of events taking place. So finally, on behalf of Adam, Pascal, and Belinda, as well as myself, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Goodbye.